Hi everybody, good to be with you again and have another one of Hype's webinar series. This one focused on where innovation management lives. So where in your organization should you run your online innovation management program? Where does it make sense to base that, and what are some of the challenges on that journey? And this is a topic that comes up quite a lot in the work that we do, particularly in organizations that are new to this space, or are putting to systems in place to help support existing manual processes. So I'm going to be delving into some of the details associated with that, giving you some different suggestions in terms of places where innovation management can live, look at the advantages and disadvantages of each. But first, just some general introductions. I know many of you already, but those of you who are new to me, I run a strategic consulting group at Hype. This is the Enterprise Innovation Management Group, which is where we support organizations with the people and process considerations around establishing these online programs. So we look at the change management, the process training, all this sort of stuff that's outside of the software, really, to ensure that we get people to share, we get people to collaborate, and we get people to work in such a way that their programs are sustainable. So I've been doing this kind of role for around 10 years, supporting all kinds of different organizations, and I have a small team that's spaced around the world that supports all kinds of different organizations of different shapes and sizes. So we support about 50 different organizations every year just within my team with all kinds of different topics. And what you're going to see today is really an aggregation of our experiences and our insights gained from those experiences. So it's really based upon real-world challenges, problems, observations, and opportunities. So feel free to, as Mitch said, raise some questions in the little box on the right-hand side of your GoToMeeting, and at the end I will endeavor to ask any questions that I can. We're going to be running this session a little bit shorter today for various logistical reasons, but I hope to still be able to offer you some great insights. So a little insight into my world. This is the sort of space that I occupy, sustainable and collaborative enterprise innovation programs. And each of those words are picked very, very deliberately. We find, of course, that innovation management programs need to be sustainable. They need to deliver regular innovations that are going to help us grow and sustain our businesses for many years, not just one-offs. So the sustainability aspect really needs to be considered at the start, and certainly when we think about structures and where to put innovation management in our companies, that sustainability piece needs to be taken into consideration. For those of you who have sort of got any kind of experience within an innovation space, you'll be aware that collaboration, diversity of opinion, and getting insights from disparate groups across your organizations is really fundamental to developing better rounded ideas, better rounded concepts that are likely to sustain your business for many years to come. So the collaboration aspect is crucial. Increasingly there's an acceptance that across our enterprises every corner can really help us. People have different perspectives, different views on what we do, and just because they're not experts doesn't necessarily mean they have nothing to add. But as soon as we get into the enterprise world, we then need software, and that's why organizations like Hype exist, to support the enterprise scale, so we no longer need to worry about how many people we can involve. It's more, how do we involve them. And then when we're talking about enterprise scale and software, we need to understand how people behave online, how to get them to share, collaborate, and do so at a high level of quality. And that's really where myself and my team come in, supporting organizations. That's my world. That's the kind of viewpoint that I occupy. So this presentation is not going to be about software at all. We're focused on more of the people process considerations. Just a couple of very quick slides about Hype for those of you who are new to us. So we've been in business around 15 years. We have around 240 clients worldwide, and we focus specifically on innovation management supported by online tools. Our headquarters in Europe is in Bonn, Germany. We also have a US headquarters in Boston, Massachusetts, and presence elsewhere in the world, places like Abu Dhabi and in France. We have a range of products that support all kinds of different innovation management challenges. The most popular one is our end-to-end product, which supports everywhere from trends and inspirations all the way through to execution and ideation on that journey. and the idea that we have about all of our products is to make them as configurable as possible so they can support all kinds of different organizations as you proceed. We're not just a software provider though that is crucial to delivering the scale challenge that we all face. Embedded in that software and also in our guidance is process. So how do we get people to share and collaborate and really get everybody to work together well across our organizations, as well as the more technical elements of implementation like integration, and the Enterprise Innovation Consulting Group is the group that I head, which deals with, as I mentioned, the people, process, change management considerations that we need to deal with. So now that you know about Hype, let me introduce you to the agenda for today. I'm going to look at some of the starting points that organizations come at this particular challenge. So at what point do they say, we need to think about where innovation management needs to live? Where should we place it in our organization? And what the sort of background to getting to that point? And I'm sure that most of you will see some synergies with your own worlds as we get through to that point. We'll have a bit of a chat about why positioning is important and the effect that can have, and also look at the challenges associated with incorrect positioning. There are a number of models, and we'll go through those, and there is no perfect model, so they all have their challenges, and we'll look at the advantages and disadvantages of each. So bear in mind that irrespective of your situation, you really need to think about this quite carefully, because every decision you make also comes with a bit of a counterpoint. So in many cases, organizations will choose a model and they'll often move to others as their organization changes and their maturity around innovation management develops, and try and give you a sense of what that journey might look like as well. And then we'll summarize with sort of top 5 recommendations, things to think about in terms of if this is something in your minds, what sort of little tick list should you go through. And again, hopefully this is just the start of a conversation. If you'd like to follow up on any of these points afterwards, please feel free. There's only so much we can go into in a webinar, but hopefully this gives you some food for thought and some ideas and insights. So let's kick off with the most common starting points and the reasons why people start to care about where online innovation management should live. The most common one is where a company has said, perhaps with a background of research and development, says, you know what, actually we want to be more inclusive about innovation. We want to include people that have never previously been involved in our innovation management programs before, because we believe that they have ideas and insights and knowledge that can contribute to us. And that often typically goes hand in hand with an increase in breadth of innovation topics. So instead of just looking at pure products or pure services, we'll typically look at a wider range of conversations around business models and processes and those sorts of things. What that means, though, is that those with the innovation skills, the people that have the experience of what it means to create, a concept, write a business case to look for funding, they need to help the rest. They need to help educate the rest of the organization what innovation is and how to play a part in that. And of course their role as perhaps experienced R&D professionals may well shift as well. Maybe they'll be spending more energy filtering out the great ideas and concepts from the stuff that comes from that wider community. Now sometimes this expansion is just internally and sometimes it's externally. I'll dig into the second part of that in a moment. Another sort of very common starting point is where organizations have a background of continuous improvement, that sort of foundation. So they already have people sharing on ideas associated with making their day job better, making the organization more lean. Perhaps they're involved in continuous improvement or operational excellence programs, but something that is perhaps not focused on new product or service or business model capability. Even though they're still sharing ideas, they're still working with their colleagues in some kind of capacity. And that might be a manual process where people are writing ideas on a piece of paper and handing them to a shop floorman, or it might be something that's partially electronic, perhaps people sending an email or dropping it into a Dropbox. It doesn't really matter. That the point is that people are used to sharing. They're used to sharing their ideas, and that's quite a good foundation from which to build. Layering on innovation on top of that is quite a natural progression. And a really good example of this is articulated on a case study from Casa Pellis that's on our website. If you want to hear a story of what this transition feels like, that's a good starting point. And there's no wish to dampen down the enthusiasm for continuous improvement, of course, but we do need to start educating this group on what innovation means and how to get involved. And for some people, of course, the word innovation is not a useful word at all. For many of us, we may well work in organizations which are heavily risk-averse, and we're focused on being consistent and high quality and not necessarily innovating or creating. So our language and our terminology becomes quite important when we're looking to take this foundation and build upon it. There are organizations that are more service-focused, typically don't have an R&D department and not necessarily used to systematic development of new things. Often, if you're in the healthcare sector or you're a service organization of some type, government, education perhaps, innovation as a process may not exist as a thing within your organization. That doesn't mean that you've never created anything new. Many organizations have, but doing it systematically at scale will probably be new. And to a certain extent, we often find the level of knowledge and understanding of what it means to be innovative and creative and share and collaborate well is often missing in these sorts of organizations. And in many cases, as I mentioned a moment ago, these are groups that are relatively risk-averse, that spend their time taking issues away and making things as slick and as efficient as possible, but not necessarily innovating. So again, there can be an education process. There may well not be sort of legacy challenges that may exist associated with a skill set change in R&D or even a migration from continuous improvement mindset to more innovative mindset, but still there are some challenges in terms of helping the organization understanding how to get involved. And similar to other models, especially the continuous improvement model, there tends to need to be some kind of slow ramp-up necessary to effect a significant change in behaviors, which of course will underpin a change in culture. So just going big bang, often in services organizations, is not necessarily a great approach. And another model that we see is where an organization has been working within a particular division or a team or a geography, but kind of in isolation to the rest of the organization. So the approach has been effective. We've seen people sharing and generating good ideas that have been useful to our business in some kind of capacity. But now we need to cater for a new range of needs. That division has been spotted by others, and now it's of interest to people to say, actually, well, can we use what the experiences that have been honed and generated in a single division and actually scale that up to other divisions, perhaps other silos, perhaps that have never been connected to this division at all. And that comes with its own set of challenges. What's good about this model, of course, is you've got some kind of proof points, some evidence that it works, which helps with fostering belief in the process. But the downside is that often they have quite a local process, something that's been developed specifically for that particular division, which may or may not correlate to other divisions across the organization. Particularly there's a cultural element. You might imagine if we've generated a program in the West and we want to transpose that to, say, a Far Eastern culture like China, we may find that people respond quite differently to an approach that we've taken. And so we may need to adapt that approach a little bit to make sure we're as inclusive as possible for the new groups that are being involved. So there are a range of starting points, so scaling up and building upon a foundation of continuous improvement, shifting a pure internal R&D focus to be more inclusive across the organization, scaling up a division that perhaps has a history of success but not necessarily at vast scale, and then of course the other one was looking at service organizations that perhaps don't have that background, that history of a systematic, programmatic innovation as a process. So hopefully some of those will resonate with you, but let's look at why positioning of your innovation management program is so important. And really it does come down to complexity. If we're really small and we have half a dozen people, then we really don't need some software. Once we're getting up to 12, 20, 50, 100 people, then certainly we're struggling to put everybody in the room at the same time. And certainly when we get up to the thousands, the tens of thousands, and the hundreds of thousands, the scale and complexity of our organizations really does boggle the mind. And often it's interesting, if you ask somebody to say, well, draw me an organization chart, if they work for a company that's, say, bigger than 10, 20,000, they'll really struggle because they don't know actually what every part of the business does and how everything fits together. It just gets too big for any single person to fully understand it, and perhaps people at sort of very high levels. And this is an interesting point, because those that are most attracted to online innovation management programs are often large multinational corporations, and they come with that degree of complexity. So there's a cultural complexity. There are different objectives that exist at different levels in the organization, and all of these things need to be taken into account. They may well have a history of mergers and acquisitions where people feel loyalty to a local operating division as opposed to the corporation, or perhaps feel loyalty to their country's division rather than the corporation, and that of course can change people's perceptions when it comes to getting people together and asking them to work on common challenges. There may be multiple languages spoken, and so again, we need to look at how that's going to change the dynamics. If we only run the program in one primary company language and we have people that simply don't speak that in far-flung parts of the world, that's going to change the considerations we make around our innovation management team. And we really do need to make sure that all corners are supported. If we follow the logic that diversity of opinion is important and everybody can help us if given the right kind of challenges, the right questions, the right kind of topics to address, then we do need to be as inclusive as we can. But bear in mind that even the largest organizations don't have vast corporate innovation teams. I think the largest corporate innovation teams are probably 20, 30 people, and maybe they have colleagues within divisions. But the centralized innovation groups, even in the very, very large organizations, are typically pretty small when considered in correlation to the organizational size. So that means there might be quite a big distance between you as an innovator, you as somebody who can contribute, and the innovation professionals who actually have this as their day job. We want to have maximum impact from our people. We want to make sure it's sustainable. And so all of these things go into the equation that says, actually, we really do need to think about where we're going to place our program, both now and where might it go in the future, to make sure that we can leverage our capabilities and our collective insight as effectively as possible. So let's look at the sort of warning signs, the sort of challenges that you might see if we're positioned incorrectly. Often it's good to just sort of be aware of some of the issues before you start making those decisions. Now, I don't believe in fairy stories. This sort of stuff does happen, and it can be a challenge. So you may be actually facing these challenges right now. So innovations happening in parallel in separate divisions and separate silos. In perhaps we may even be reinventing the wheel. Two divisions or multiple divisions doing the same thing. Perhaps there's a really limited ability to identify cross-divisional opportunities and no real collective insight benefits. If we are all operating our own little silos, we're simply not punching we're punching below our weight. And of course that really holds us back as an organization. Many companies will also feel this is kind of a starting point. The reason for using online tools is to break these silos. So the last thing we want to do is to make a structural decision which is going to propagate this challenge that we face. Perceptions of disruption. This is a really interesting one, particularly if you come from, say, a services organization where there's a significant portion of the company that need to carry on with the day job, and actually we're probably not going to include in some of the more adventurous, radical innovation decisions that we're thinking about. If you might imagine that some divisions are highly risk-averse and need to be focused on a very, very efficient process, and we set up a parallel division, maybe an incubator, it's looking at some radical business models. Some of those business models may actually disrupt the core business. Now, if we are super inclusive about those conversations, we are going to disturb the established business, and they're not going to be enthusiastic about potentially, to use an analogy, we're not going to see turkeys voting for Christmas. So we need to be cautious, and in many cases this will force us to silo off certain innovation activities to make sure that we don't scare the people that are perhaps in jobs where they may well continue, but maybe in a different way, in a different shape, or may stay exactly as they are, but we still need to have that discussion to look at other business models and ways of doing things. People do get disconcerted by seeing big strategic change ideas, even if they're not potentially adopted. So again, a structural consideration. There is a good reason why lots of large corporations set up parallel incubator activities that have some freedom to be creative and ask the tough questions that perhaps the regular organization can't ask, to allow those discussions to happen, to be able to work out what the next shape of the business is going to look like over longer periods of time. Spoiling the well. So if we don't have clarity, if we don't have consistency of process, then people tend to disengage. as an employee, you may well see multiple different innovation activities happening in parallel, and that's fine. But if you're seeing quite a big difference in terms of how they're operating, then you may well be confused by that. And typically anything that feels a little confusing or gives you any uncertainty is typically going to encourage you to perhaps step out of the process yourself. So a classic example is you've got multiple divisions all running idea campaigns, and we've got some divisions being really diligent about the process. They're giving people feedback, they're showing success stories, they're offering clarity on the next steps funnel and where the innovation portfolio is going. And we've got other divisions that are perhaps not doing those sorts of things or being a little bit slack on those kind of process decisions. Now, of course, the end user, those perceptions will cross-fertilize, so they won't necessarily see that all these people are doing really great and those people are not. What they'll see is one tool, one process, and they'll see that sometimes it's not working, it doesn't feel so great. And of course they're more likely to disengage. So we do need consistency of innovation processes to ensure that people feel and continue to feel comfortable, which implies some degree of governance that needs to be put in place so that at least a bare minimum of good quality, sustainable processes or decisions are made to make sure that we keep the groups that are engaged and supportive of us. If we're again following the logic of being more inclusive, of engaging the fringes of our organization, it's the next logical step to look at externals. So those that really can contribute perhaps to the suppliers that we have who have a vested interest in our success, our business customers, our consumers, are all really interested in many cases in helping us. And of course, the challenge with that is we may well get an awful lot of quantity. The external world is a big place, and of course we're going to focus, we're going to try and innovate in the places where we think the third parties are most interested, but the consequence is we may well generate quite a lot of content that does need the internal innovation machine to be able to process. So if we're going externally, we need our innovation managers to be in a place where they can actually deal with the external world in an effective way. It means that they're going to need links to people who manage contracts. They're going to need links to the people that own relationships with third parties, whomever those third parties are. And of course, that's going to, again, change potentially where you put that innovation management team. There's nothing worse than saying, I think there's some great logic with going out to our supply chain and being completely overwhelmed by the content, not being able to process it. You know that there's gold dust in there somewhere, but it's just impossible to see the wood for the trees. So we do need to make sure that we are nice and efficient, we're structured in a good way, and when we do go externally, we can actually process that external content in an effective way. And that means using and leveraging the relationships that already exist within our companies. So let's look at 4 example models. Some of these may well correlate to models that you've seen before or models that you have in your own organizations. They all come with their own sort of challenges and opportunities. So we'll just go through step by step, and where possible I'll try and give you an example of organizations that work in this kind of way. So a really common model that we see is what we call a centralized group. So this is where the innovation service team are delivering innovation to the rest of the organization, but they sit across all of the relevant divisions that exist, maybe go-to-market areas or product areas. And in some cases, they actually own the innovation portfolios. In some cases, they pass the innovation portfolio to the division for execution. But the key point is it's one team, it's in a centralized place, and it has the ability to reach into every corner of the organization. This is a fairly common starting point, to be honest, and it goes alongside other shared services, so things like HR, IT, finance, things where people are pulling on particular expertise. Now, the great thing about this model is it allows you to build up a really strong core competency. It's delivered by specialists, and it's consistent every single time. So no matter where you are in the organization, you should continue to have a good experience. You should continue to see those really good, sustainable process decisions happening in an effective way, and that gives the organization as a whole a great deal of confidence that this is something that they're prepared to support. The big challenge with this model, though, is it doesn't scale very well, particularly in large, complex organizations. You can imagine this small team struggling to get around the rest of the organization, socialize its skills, support every different group that wants to get involved in an effective way. And so at some point in time, particularly if you're in a large organization, you may want to transition to one of the other models I'm going to offer. But for smaller companies, this is great. If you're a couple of thousand people, then typically this kind of shape is going to work just really well for you. It often needs some kind of strategic oversight, either that sits in the horizontal or at the top level, like a Chief Innovation Officer, to really make the most of it, because sometimes it's not so easy to marry the innovation activities with the direction of the organization. Often this is like a pull group of people. They are providing a service to those that need it, who are pulling on it, and it may not necessarily mean that each of the divisions are actually working in a coordinated way. But generally speaking, really good starting point, deals with smaller organizations very, very well, but certainly if you're of any kind of scale, you may struggle to scale that kind of model. Okay, so the sort of counterpoint to that is more of a local model where the innovation work happens in each of the divisions, and this is where each division has its own set of innovation skills upon which it can call, and often again supported by some form of Chief Innovation Officer, that's someone that's providing some leadership to the innovation work that's happening. Now, when that's not in place, you can imagine what happens. So each of the divisions are innovating in a silo. And if you look at our Liberty Global case study, you'll see this was kind of the model that they had before they started working across the Enterprise Innovation Management tool with Hype. They had local innovation groups focused on their own silos and not really interacting with each other. One of the advantages of this model is it does scale pretty well. You can essentially support very large organizations with this kind of structure, and certainly if you do have that Chief Innovation Officer, you can ensure that all the innovation work is nice and aligned and has some sort of strategic oversight. The disadvantages are often local siloed approaches, so you find that one division is doing things really well, others are not doing so well, they're not necessarily sharing best practices, and you may find that reinventing the wheel issue does occur. So the model that I actually prefer to this is the one on the next slide, which is more of a hybrid between the two, where you actually take the advantages of both of these sorts of structures. And this is a model perhaps more familiar with the likes of people like Airbus, where they have a central innovation service team delivering out innovation services, and we have local divisional teams who are operating within a division focused on their particular speciality. And of course, that gives you kind of the best of both worlds. The one major downside, though, to this structure, of course, is it's expensive. There's a lot of people involved in it. And so normally organizations that are new to this kind of space won't be able to adopt this kind of structure on day one. They'll perhaps migrate this structure over time, particularly if they're a sort of services structure. Again, another model of this, example of this would be someone like Interserve, who spoke at our client forum in Bonn earlier this year. They have a structure like this as well, divisional experts operating within a silo, but there's some governance around what they do. There's an innovation service team there to support them. There's a sort of Chief Innovation Officer or similar coordinating the activities on the ground. And the final model is one which is again probably fairly familiar to some of you, which is where we've actually got one division who's owning the job of innovation, where they're sort of typically doing the full life cycle of research, development, and eventually delivery of new things. Now this often happens when, for whatever reason, the other divisions need to be kept out of the innovation process. So perhaps when there is a fear of disruption, perhaps this could be perceived as an incubator, or the work needs to take into account some more riskier things that they don't want to scare everybody else around. And so essentially allows, the big advantage of this is it allows the day job business to carry on without disturbing that in any way. But of course avoids any perceptions of possible cannibalization that may well come, be they true or not. However, the big downside is really the lack of incremental innovation. Because there's no shared services group that's delivering small innovation services to the rest of the business, innovating processes and small incremental stuff, you can miss out on a lot. So you may well see this actual structure married with that shared services group from the centralized model as well, as a sort of, again, a different kind of hybrid model. So for relatively different models, various different extremes, you may actually feel like you're somewhere in between a couple of them. That's fine. There's no perfect model. In terms of journeys and roadmaps, we often find companies start within a division and then roll out to more of a localized model, or they start within a shared services group and then move towards a hybrid model later on. So just some general recommendations and tips from our experiences, but taking into account all of the stuff that we've touched on so far. I think the first one is, if you're starting new, find the right home for today. Be pragmatic. You can always move the capability later. There is no reason why you have to put a structure in which is going to sustain you forever. Change is only increasing in its pace, and so the likelihood of you making the right choices anyway without a full view of what's coming is likely to be tricky. So focus on where you can make a difference today, and that may well be in a sort of shared services group providing innovation management services to a particular set of divisions, or it may well be within a division, showing and proving it within that silo and then starting to scale it up once you see evidence that it's working well for you. Focus on building competency, build skills, build experiences in the early days, and then allow others to leverage them. But just be aware that they may well need some adaptation depending on their particular goals and their particular cultures. So just because it's been working really well within this one division doesn't mean necessarily you can transpose it without any adaptations at all to wherever else in the company. Normally when we're working with an organization in the early days, we'll talk a lot about culture, we'll talk a lot about structure, we'll talk a lot about objectives, because those three things will have a big bearing on how an organization will roll this out. And what we want to do is make sure that the program is aligned to the cultural level of readiness. There's no such thing as not being ready, but there is such a thing as trying to push too hard or actually not being aggressive enough in terms of your innovation needs. It needs to be appropriately aligned. Participants need a consistent experience, so that implies, again, some good governance over the process. So what most organizations will do, certainly in the models that perhaps have some centralized function and are likely to devolve responsibility to others, is they will put in place as a bare minimum set of process requirements. So like, you will need to make sure that if you're running a campaign, for example, you have a sponsor. You make sure that we give feedback at the end of the campaign. We make sure we offer some degree of transparency about what our innovation portfolio looks like from time to time. We share success stories essentially. That kind of bare minimum level of coordination to make sure that everybody's following some degree of effective process. Now, of course, that central group, they can enforce those best practices as well as they can, but it's really going to increase the likelihood that the individual on the ground is going to have a consistent experience of what it means to share and collaborate across our peers internationally and work together on innovation. So there's nothing wrong at all with starting local and scaling up, adapting to the structure that you have. So build a process which is appropriate to what you need, but don't worry too much about where it's going to go, because often it's quite hard to decide where the correct home is. Go after the people that have a passion for this, the divisions that have the most needs. Don't try to boil the ocean. So it's always a good idea just to poll a group of sort of senior VPs and say, where might you take advantage of this? Get a sense of where the passion is. And if there's a particular division that has a good passion, some real challenges or some real opportunities they'd like to explore, let's go after that, let's embed ourselves there, and then we can decide later on where we want to migrate towards. And then, of course, the final part of the puzzle is consider who will leverage the approach later on. So when you're looking at the longer-term home, look at the breadth of usage and the strategic direction. Is this only ever going to be a new product development process? Is it going to include business models as well? Is it going to include processes? What about if we want to involve the continuous improvement team and those people interested in cost reduction and sharing best practices? Those sorts of answers will affect your decisions on where you might want to place it. So bear it in mind and think about what the long-term vision is going to be. I will always try and encourage organizations to think about having some form of central team. It's always going to be helpful. And then use local advocates to help you scale, or local divisional experts as you get some momentum and some progress. But be flexible. Make sure we enforce that minimum set of activities, and that should allow us lots of options in terms of where we take this approach moving forward. So that's the formal content for today. I'm just going to take a quick look, see what questions we have. If any of you have popped up any questions so far, I'll take a look at those. So, okay, good. I've got one question here. Let me just read it very quickly, and I'll repeat it back to everybody else. So, what if we were to do a pilot? Does it make sense to start in a division or in a horizontal issue like a shared services group? So this is a tricky one. It kind of plays to one of the points I made towards the end, which is go where the passion and the enthusiasm is. If you have a division that has a particular set of challenges or needs, and it has a set of topics where there's clear sponsorship for innovation, then that's obviously a good starting point. Now that may not be in a division. You might find that the finance say, well, let's focus on cost reduction for now. That's our major need. Well, that's a great way of demonstrating whether this process helps or not. There's nothing wrong with starting with some of the less innovative topics just to demonstrate this has value, especially when we can achieve some quick wins and some turnarounds. Okay, another question that we have. Our program is in the division. Feels like it's in the wrong place. How easy actually is it to move? So yeah, again, it depends is the short answer. So obviously, if you have some success within your division, then you are in a better place in terms of shifting the program. If you're having no success, you've really got to look at the reasons why you're struggling. And so it's kind of a tough question to really answer in a short way. But let's assume that you've got some success. It's really then about socializing that success. It's about sharing that progress with other people and seeing where else there may be an interest to it. And then if I'm in a division, the first conversation I probably have is with somebody who looks after the shared services group or somebody who's more the chief operating officer. Should we build this in as a core competency that others can potentially take advantage of? That's probably my first starting point. And if the answer, of course, is yes, then it's really about training that group and transposing some of the skills and experiences that have been used and allowing those skills to be developed and serve the rest of the organization. Now, for some cases, you might find, well, actually, there is no interest in the horizontal, but there is interest in a parallel division. Slightly more challenging to deal with, but of course the same principle applies. We need to try and foster those set of skills in that group and to support them as they get going. If you've had some experience of this, you'll know there is a crawl, walk, run ethos that's required, and therefore we need to sort of go a little bit steady, and you may need to support them on that journey.